So I feel compelled to do a video, but I'm not even sure what I'm going to talk about. Initially, when I felt compelled to do something, I was reflecting on some things that I was writing down that could be seen more as a confessional of a very abstract model that has to do with esoteric mathematics, but even more so an arcane energy working system. For instance, you could see the process of the sun as a necessary emission of radiation that on a very material level produces life here, right? You have photosynthesis and all these other assumed natural constants, right? Thermic regulation, heat, and so forth, that hail back to a thermodynamic aspect. Or you could see it exclusively as a shifting mechanism or center point where geometrical shapes themselves are in flux, and that these are sort of like dictating a certain time code or time signature that wraps about through toroidal fields that are based on the localization of the event. As to say, something that I inferred to prior to was that nothing exists, therefore nothing matters. We begin with that sort of thing. But that time folding on itself at a particular angle, it validates itself. Even if you're talking about chirality, if nothing existed, but something is aware and viewing it, and in the proposition of a shift of nothing, it was aware of itself in its rotation or shift of nothing. In other words, just by the rotation alone and a center point in nothingness, you would then still have an assumed something. And so when you look at an algorithm that is created to not perpetuate in an eternal sense, but to come to a certain number code or number system where it would then be dead-ended, right? And you had these layers of algorithmic consistency where one postulate would be more relevant than another. And again, the way that the best way to think about this in a sort of linear through a linear projection would be like cryptocurrency and these forks that go off of the cryptocurrencies, So you have these, you have the main strip, right, which I often refer to as memetics. In other words, you only need the first few numbers. And the only thing that people are doing right now that and understanding that differentiate them and set them apart at this point, and something that I haven't done, is understanding algebra, calculus, trigonometry, and then to understand that these base, when you're talking about computer coding, that these base really non-Euclidean spherical mathematical concepts of these shapes could then be combinated into zeros and ones, and you would have a sort of Morse code dictation that occurs here as a communication mechanism or tool that differentiates it. You only have to have one. It's almost like these omega 3, omega 6, omega 9. It's about the bonds, where these double bonds take place, right, and how strong they are, right, at particular junction points. And isn't it interesting that you have that naturally occurring, right? You look at Tesla, the whole 369 thing, and so fat is really important for the permeability of our cells, but it could also be looked at from an alchemical sense. Um, and then you can also look at protein structures, because these protein structures really are these geometrical constants. They infer a, an ephemeral, finite position of these thermodynamic sort of nuclear constants, right? Because that's what we're talking about is we're talking about vibrational energy, right? So I'm gonna do like a part 2 on this.